Howdy ho, folks. Howdy ho. Howdy ho, America and points beyond. Who has power and what are they doing with it? Politics is not a natural act.
That's right.
That's right.
I must admit, I never heard that one from you, too.
There's so many feisty fighters against the greedheads and boneheads. So grab a libation, join the conversation. It's the personal side of politics, and it is surprisingly tasty. And howdy ho, America. We're back. Yes, welcome back to another Hightower Lowdown Happy Hour at the old Chat and Chew, which is otherwise my kitchen table. Here we are, and we want you to join us at the old round table. So grab a libation, if you will, any sort will do, and join the conversation. Deanna Zand is with us as always. Wave at the people, Deanna. There she is.
Hello.
Say she's ready to take your order and to come into the conversation with us. She'll be monitoring the comments that you might make. Those of you who are tuned in through Free Speech TV or any of the social media platforms, we welcome all of you. And we're gathered here tonight in a not so happy hour, actually. And we have to not just acknowledge that, but reflect on that. And that, of course, is the shooting in Uvalde, Texas. Yet another massacre by guns in our society. And we're going to visit about that, but not in terms of the details. That's on, you can get that on CNN and endless other news sources. But why is this happening? Why 80% of the American people support some serious forms of gun control? Why, therefore, 80% of the people can't get any action done on it? We have the Buffalo massacre. We again and again. No need to go down the list. You know them too well. It's become a common phenomenon in a society that is supposed to be, quasi-civilized. And so what's going on here? Don't we have laws? Well, we have laws that embrace the slaughter, laws that facilitate the slaughter. And those laws carry all the way to the Supreme Court. And that's the topic we want to dwell on tonight, is the Supreme Court itself. None of this is happening by accident. We also, by the way, of course, have the recent acknowledgement inadvertently by the Supreme Court that they're intending to overturn the Roe versus Wade decision, taking away the constitutional right of women to control their own bodies, to control their own health, a taking of constitutional right by a 6-person majority on the Supreme Court. Who elected these people? Who the hell are they? How did they come about? How did we get stuck with this? We're going to tell you that tonight, because we're going to have Senator Sheldon Whitehouse with us in just a few minutes. He has been doing an extraordinary job as a chair of a committee that is investigating the dark money takeover of the Supreme Court. And by dark money, I mean secret funding of campaigns to put that 6-person right-wing majority in charge of our Supreme Court, and therefore in charge of so much of our lives. This is not about legalities. This is not about legal decisions and opinions. This is about how you live, how you work, how you get along, and whether you can get along. And it has been taken over by a cabal, and indeed, dare I say, a coup. Yeah. The right wing likes to talk about, well, there's that conspiracy, the QAnon conspiracy. They're having children in the basements of pizza parlors for sexual exploitation. So that's their idea of a conspiracy theory. My idea of a conspiracy theory is power. There's a select group of people in this country, a small moneyed minority, particularly corporate money, that have decided that they can rule our country and that they can rule our society, they can rule our economy, they can rule our legal system and our lives and our own decisions over our personal lives. Something as basic as whether you control your own pregnancy or not. So that is what we're going to address tonight. And Senator Whitehouse is going to be with us again. I'll talk about in a minute about his terrific work. I've got my beer, which I think is appropriate tonight. It's called Buckethead because I think we're in a Buckethead time in our country in which the people with the buckets over their heads are ruling us and ruining us in the process. So we're going to talk about that, and we want to have you join us in the conversation. And we have not only Senator Whitehouse going to be with us, but we have Imani Gandy. I said Gandhi. I want to say Gandhi, but it's Gandhi. I grew up on Gandy Street, by the way, Imani, so I don't know if that's yours or not, but there I was in Denison, Texas. Imani Gandy. Imani is senior editor of law and policy at a group called the Rewire News Group, where she covers the courts, Supreme Court and otherwise, and she does a podcast called Boom Lawyered. Imani, thanks for being with us.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Joy to have you. And Imani is coming to us with her own libation. What have you got in your hand there, Imani?
I've got a canned margarita. It's a cucumber margarita crafted by Dock Tales, and it's a Colorado brand. So
right.
They're tasty.
Because you're in Colorado. She is coming to us
that's
from
right.
Longmont, Colorado. Just up the road from Denver and more up the road from Boulder and more up the road and et cetera. There she is, but she's in the heartland of Colorado. She has her doctorate of law from the University of Virginia School of Law, and she claims to be a recovering attorney. Is that right?
Yes, still. It's been a long recovery. It's been about a decade now.
Yeah, right. So she can and does practice law, but she also is an award-winning journalist, and taking that route, I presume, Imani, because you can reach more people.
Yeah. I stopped private practice right around the time of the Tea Party explosion in 2010, 2011. And that was when we started to see just this deluge of anti-abortion laws throughout the states. And at the time I was doing crappy work for banks, and I just thought, I didn't go to law school for this. I really went to law school. I was like, I'm going to help people. And then you get they dangle a lot of money at you when you're in law school, and it's hard to resist. There's some people who can, like, I am so heartened by the young people today in law school who are going to law school to study reproductive justice, because that wasn't something that I even thought of 20 years ago. But yeah, so I just switched careers. Age 35, I said, I'm done and I'm doing something else.
So many people are in law school now who are products of the injustice of the legal system. And so they know it from the other side, and they're going to deal with it. You are, by the way, talking to a person, myself, who studied law for a week and a half at George Washington University in Washington, D.C.
And you got out before.
I learned all I needed to learn pretty much
right,
in that week and a half, and moved on to whatever it is I am now. But let's talk about let's start with the court itself. Most people think the Supreme Court. Equal justice under the law. That's on the banner, the granite banner of the temple, as it's called, of justice in Washington, D.C., right there on Capitol Hill. Elevated just a little bit above Congress, by the way. The Supreme Court is the building. And so the assumption is that this is a citadel of justice, of contemplation, of great legal thought. What's happened?
What's happened is that there has been a concerted effort over the last, I would say, certainly over the last 20 years, but broadly, there's been a more conservative effort over the last 45 years to capture the courts in order to undermine so-called substantive due process rights and other sorts of civil rights. But substantive due process rights are the sort of, I like to liken them to the rights that you use to form a family, right? So contraception, abortion, parenting, marriage, interracial marriage, same-sex marriage, just anything that deals with the intimate part of your life, privacy, sexual privacy rights. These are the rights that conservatives say are not written in the Constitution. You can't find the word abortion in the Constitution, and therefore you can't possibly have a right to an abortion. They love to forget about the Ninth Amendment, which says that all unenumerated rights are retained by the people. Yeah. That amendment ceases to exist in their mind when you start talking about sexual privacy rights. But, the court has been captured. They spent millions and millions and millions of dollars to capture the courts. And it wasn't just through things like Leonard Leo being so involved in, Justice Roberts' ascension to the court, Alito's ascension to the court, basically being the person who was advising Trump when it came to Supreme Court nominees. It's long before that. I mean, it started when Roberts was Solicitor General under Reagan and wrote a memo about how basically the Voting Rights Act was bullshit. Am I allowed to curse? I don't know.
Yes, you're allowed to say that. Yes. It's a constitutional right.
That the Voting Rights Act was nonsense and that there should be an effort to undermine the Voting Rights Act. That started in the 80s. Yeah. And it culminated in 2013 with the Shelby County decision. And so now we're in a world where there are people who are being materially harmed by this court that has been captured by conservatives. And there's nothing that they can really do about it, because in this country, the way that you are supposed to make yourself heard is at the ballot, right? You're supposed to be able to vote in representatives, people who represent your interests. But due to extensive gerrymandering and just outright racist voter suppression, there are people who are just not able to have their voices heard. And that's intentional. Yes. Because, if you strip away people's right to vote, then you strip away their ability to elect people who are going to represent them. That shapes Congress in a completely incongruous way, which in turn shapes the judiciary in a completely incongruous way, which in turn shapes the executive. I mean, it's a vicious cycle. And frankly, Democrats and people, progressives, liberals, socialists, wherever you fall on the left end of the scale, we are losing due to things like dark money, due to people like Leonard Leo, who I think we're going to talk about later today, later in the show. So
yeah, we're going to get
it's a mess out there, Jim.
Yes, well, it is, and it's intentional, as you say. But now it is ensconced by the Supreme Court. The gerrymandering, the voter suppression, the doing away with the Voting Rights Act, the attacks on labor and rights of working people to be able to organize, able even to collect dues to have a labor organization. All of these are attacks by the Supreme Court. The attack on women that we're experiencing, and not just over abortion, but now over even contraceptives, so they want to be not just in your womb, they want to be in your medicine cabinet as well. These are people who say that it's government tyranny to have a public health mandate that you wear a mask, but we get to go into your most private parts and determine your life for you. And that's literally what happens, of course, if in some of these pregnancy situations, is terribly about the life that you would live subsequently. And so who elected these people? And that's what, again, getting back to the court itself, it's the third branch of government. It is the tiniest branch of government. Only 9 people are on the court, and any 5 of those 9 can bring up any lawsuit that they want to bring up to be considered by the court. Any 5 of them can then rule to take away a constitutional right or to extend corporate rights, particularly moneyed rights, such as Citizen United. Our listeners are familiar with Citizen United very much, the enthronement of money in our political system, and then that they can effectively run the good. And so that's where we come to this guy named Leonard Leo, whom Imani mentioned, and we want to explore Leonard just a little bit. He's the most powerful person you've never heard of in America, and has attained a status that is unconscionable in our democracy, a status that allows him to do unconscionable things to our democracy. And we've got Senator Whitehouse has been able to join us now. And Senator, where are you? Where do we find you? Are you in Rhode Island?
No, I'm in Washington, D.C. We're in the middle of a big vote sequence.
Yes, well, I understand that. And these are rough times right now, I know, generally speaking, but particularly after the
Well,
Uvalde.
it's particularly sickening after what's happening in Texas, and to
Disaster.
see the dark money power of the dark money NRA.
Yes. Well, let's talk
all the
a little about that,
Republicans
because
just come to heel.
we were just saying how these things are not actually accidental in our society. We're talking with Imani Gandy here about abortion in particular, but also the gun lobby. And you did a rather remarkable, not study, a remarkable expose, I would say, of the gun lobby a couple of years ago. There it is. Look at that.
There it is.
The very study.
Part of our series that goes right at our friend Leonard Leo, who's
this is so important.
Spider in this web.
Let me just say that this is so important. You know, I've been at this a long time. You know, and I think of Ralph Nader and so many people who've been in this fight forever, taking on corporate power. And you have done yeoman service, going back to like Frank Church did back in the 1970s, and other senators, Bill Fulbright, even, who took on the Vietnam War, used the power of discourse in a senatorial hearing to expose an issue. And that's what Sheldon Whitehouse has done as a Rhode Island senator, but a U.S. senator, to expose this phenomenal incursion into our democracy by this small minority of 6 people, majority on the court, but a small minority of people in our 330 million population country, to knock down the authority of the people themselves. So tell us a little bit about what you found on that study on the gun rights lobby and the money that they put in.
What we saw was a dark money funded conveyor belt to take suitable people who were groomed and had auditioned to be far right wing corporate special interest servants, and move them onto the court. The Center for Media and Democracy has tallied up the expense that they've been able to show of this operation, and it's $580 million. So nobody spends $580 million for nothing. They had a purpose. And what they set up was a turnstile at the Federalist Society, controlled by big special interests secretly, who decided who got to get through the turnstile and be a federal judge. They picked all 3 of the Trump Supreme Court justices. They picked first Gorsuch, having convinced Mitch McConnell to stiff Merrick Garland. And then they picked Brett Kavanaugh. And then they picked Amy Coney Barrett. And for each one, once they'd picked them, another group, this is a Leonard Leo special, another Leonard Leo group called the Judicial Crisis Network, took huge anonymous contributions, like a check for $15 million, a check for $17 million, and turned that into ad campaigns for the selected nominees. And then once they're on the court, there's this whole other armada of phony front groups that tell them what to do, also funded by dark money. And because it's dark money, you don't exactly know who's behind it, but the most logical proposition is that the same people picked the justices, put up the money to run the ad campaigns for their confirmation, and are behind the groups that are telling them what to do. So it's
And by
a
dark
big
money,
coordinated operation.
by dark money, what the senator is talking about is secret money.
Secret money.
These
Don't
are
know who gave
donors.
it. They hide who they are.
They claim to give money to charities.
Well, they're sort of
this,
fake charities. Yeah.
like this Judicial Crisis Network and others, and then they disperse money to political campaigns. Yet we as voters don't know who originated that money. For example, Leonard Leo, whom we're talking about,
Yep.
he weaponized a kind of a quasi-academic group, the Federalist Society, back in the 1990s, to turn it into a right-wing partisan advocate for putting corporate-minded, moneyed-minded justices on all of our courts, but including the Supreme Court.
Particularly the Supreme Court.
Yes, and as the senator indicated, that included the three Trump appointees, whom Leonard Leo himself designated to the Trump White House that they should nominate. But he had also participated in the Roberts nomination to the court, in the
Alito nomination to the court.
Yes.
In fact, you remember that George W. Bush wanted his very conservative Texas lawyer, Harriet Miers, who he knew personally, who worked for him in the White House, to go into the Supreme Court to replace Sandra Day O'Connor. So you're replacing a woman with a woman, and a personal friend, and somebody he trusted, and somebody loyal to the Bushes. And Leonard Leo was able to kick up a far right-wing firestorm so much that a Republican president had to humiliatingly withdraw his own Supreme Court nominee, and in came a kind of unknown right-wing extremist, I want to say from the 8th Circuit, maybe it was the 6th Circuit, a guy named Sam Alito, who had shown Leonard Leo that he'd be just the right kind of judge for his big donors. And sure enough, he has been.
Yes, he has been very loyal. And these are, so this is a deliberate placement, incrementally.
Yep.
You know, it's taking the long view. What we're doing.
Take your time.
Goes back to Clarence Thomas, that he helped orchestrate the confirmation fight for Clarence Thomas under George H.W. Bush, Daddy Bush. So this guy has been at it for a number of years, and
Trump and everybody admitted that he didn't pick the judges. He just appointed who he was told to pick by whoever was operating behind Leonard Leo. Leonard Leo is a functionary.
Yes.
And the big donors behind him tell him what to do, and he does it. And Trump was told by them who to pick, and Leonard Leo delivered the names, and he saluted and obeyed and picked them. It's an amazing system that a private, secretive organization would be designated to choose Supreme Court nominees while accepting huge multi-million-dollar anonymous contributions
from such uninterested Americans as Coors Beer, Searle Drugs, Mercer, Wall Street outfit, Scaife, the banking and media outfit, Olin, into chemicals and guns, and of course the Koch brothers, the Koch family. These are among the families that have put the $530 $500 million into putting their people on the Supreme Court, and those are the people who are now coming down on us with this gun. This gun reality.
You know, people think about this as a conservative court. That's what they'd like you to believe. It's not a conservative court. It's a special interest captured court.
Right.
To think of a model like this, you have to go back to, the 19th century and think of railroad commissions that the railroad industry took over so they could set high rates because it was all their friends who were making the decisions for them. Or you got to go back to the Minerals Management Service that was taking bribes and letting the fossil fuel industry do whatever it wanted in the Gulf until the Deepwater Horizon exploded and all those men were killed because you had a captured regulatory agency. That's what this is. This is the capture of a court by special interests. It has nothing to do with being conservative.
Yes, we've and And again, all right, let me back up a little bit. So this is an enormously powerful third branch of government with basically 9 people making the decisions, and they make them in secret. They can conspire with each other or with anybody they want to. They do not have to tell us why they rendered these decisions. It is a complete autocracy.
Yep, and it's the only group of 9 judges in the entire federal system that are not under any kind of a ethics code and don't have any kind of ethics enforcement or anywhere to complain to if they seem to be in flagrant violation of the ethics rules that apply to the rest of the federal judges in the country.
And so that's where we're getting these decisions on abortion, for example, that the at least 2/3, if not more, of the American people are against what the Supreme Court is about to do. We get it on guns, where 80% of the American people support some strong elements of gun control. And yet,
and we get it on politics, where they
Citizens
let loose
United,
gerrymandering, let loose unlimited money, let loose anonymous unlimited money. And it looks like recently they've just created a constitutional right to unlimited anonymous political money and made the anonymity a constitutional right.
It is the creation of a plutocracy over our democracy. That's what these people are actually doing.
They would love it.
I just find it fascinating that they can create this new right just out of whole cloth. Whatever happened to originalism and textualism?
Right, you're right.
Well, they say abortion is not a word that can be found in the Constitution.
Right.
Neither is corporation.
Corporation, there you go.
And yet the Republican justices on the Supreme Court have spent several decades carefully building political rights for corporations that the founding fathers would be horrified by, that were never expected in the Federalist Papers or the constitutional debates, that have no place in the Constitution. And they not only first let him into our politics, and they let him into our politics with unlimited money, and now they're letting him into our politics anonymously with unlimited money. And that's originalists? Give me a break.
Yeah, originalism. Well, I'll just do one little rundown that I got from Whitehouse's work, and that is in 2017, this Leonard Leo guy he created 3 new of these secret funds that the center refers to as dark money. He has a great phrase, by the way. He says, "Money talks, dark money whispers," and that's exactly right. And in their whispering, they're taking our rights away. So Leo created these 3 entities that were called charities, meaning they did not have to disclose where the money actually came from. And he took $24 million for one of his funds called the BH Fund. The BH Fund then gave $1 million to another of his groups called America Engaged. America Engaged then gave $1 million in 2017 to the NRA, and the NRA then spent $1 million to help put Neil Gorsuch on the Supreme Court, their selected nominee. That's how the Washington merry-go-round goes around, and how we get twisted up in it. Now, Imani, you're out there.
You want to have even more fun? I can take you through another fine little mess.
All right.
So this is Leonard Leo's little operation. He's got 3 companies called CRC that do strategies, public relations, and advisors. That's where the money comes to him. And that's where some of the big money goes in. And, they're all kind of off the books. And then the rest of the bug is 501c3 and 501c4. They twin them. They take a 501c3 tax deductible and a 501c4 semi-political, and they put them together. And so there's 85 on a Concord fund, and each one of them has 3 legs, these other corporations, which are called fictitious names under Virginia corporate law. Each one is a fictitious name. So here, Judicial Crisis Network is a fictitious name of the Concord Fund. Judicial Crisis Network is the group that was spending all that money for first Gorsuch, then Kavanaugh, then Barrett. So the group that was spending all that money wasn't even a real group. It was the fictitious name of another group that is actually a front group that hides its donors. So the whole thing is just
it's a mess. And also on your little whiteboard, CRC Public Relations. That's the group that was responsible for attacking Christine Blasey Ford. They were activated to go hard for Brett Kavanaugh.
Right.
So I mean, they've got their fingers in the pies in all respects when it comes to confirmation hearings, when it comes to deciding who's going to be on the court, when it comes to literally telling them what to do and how to act. The problem with the court right now is not that there are conservatives on it. No. It's that there are conservatives who are taught and bred from law school to think the exact same way. There's no diversity of thought. And, back in the day, 25 years ago, there would actually be diversity of thought such that a conservative appointed justice could end up voting with the liberals. Leonard Leo didn't want that to be happening anymore, and he stepped in and said, "We're not doing this." So it's really a destruction of the court. It's an incursion of the gravitas of the court, right? Like I grew up thinking that the Supreme Court had this gravitas, and it just doesn't have that anymore. It's a clown show, and it's a clown show that controls the lives of so many people and can mete out material harm to so many people, and they don't care. And
absolutely. I just want to jump in
let me
real
just
quick.
add for Imani one little fun factoid about CRC. They actually put out a press release for Kavanaugh once he was on the court.
Oh dear!
After an oral argument, touting what he had said.
Well, I mean, that's embarrassing. That's embarrassing when you have a PR group that has to out your opinions because your opinions are crap.
This is a merry-go-round that makes us all dizzy. DZ, we got
clown
some
show
comments.
merry-go-round.
Yeah,
Holy cow! Our comments are on fire tonight. So thank you both, Imani and Senator Whitehouse, for being here. The people are really into this issue, and I have to say, as a kind of everyday person, sometimes I'm like, Supreme Court, blah blah blah, and like something interesting happens, like whatever. But people are really hot on this issue. So, Senator, I know that you have to go pretty soon. We
have votes on the floor. I've got to keep cycling back to the floor.
Yes, I hear from your staffers that you're headed back to the floor. But if you want to answer one question before you go, it's what can everyday people do about this? How can we change this?
Yes.
You've got to rally around groups so your voice is amplified, and you've got to focus on the problem of dark political money, whether it's packing the court or whether it's doing voter suppression or whether it's intimidating Republicans into being able to do anything about guns because of the NRA's clout. Issue after issue is driven by dark money. And we're going to take up in the Senate and in the House this year the Disclose Act, which would require contributions over $10,000 to be out in the light of day. And when you put the light of day on these cockroaches, they will scuttle.
Let me just inject here that this is where we need to be talking about what we're going to do about this. And the good news is that while this is an enormously powerful, tiny third branch of government, it is enormously vulnerable to politics because they have no credibility. They have no army. They have no taxing authority. They cannot make us do these things. What they rule on abortion, what they rule on guns, we do not have to accept it. We can rebel against it. And
Jim, and Imani and Dina, I'm signing off. Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Because that is, Imani, that is what I think our hope is. What you're doing is this grassroots work out there to, one, let people know that there is this thing called the Supreme Court that's running roughshod over us, but two, that we can actually do something about it and that we can take it on. What do you say?
I think you're absolutely right. And I think that, further to what Senator Whitehouse said, Democrats have been slow, I think, to focus on the courts in the way that I think that they should have been. And that's it's happened, it's passed. We can move on from that, but moving forward means that that Democrats, and particularly Democratic voters, who I understand right now feel demoralized because of various issues that they feel are not being addressed. But I know in my work, when it comes to abortion rights, I'm probably not going to see a change for the good in my lifetime, but I'm fighting the long fight, right? This is a generational fight. And so I would encourage people who feel like, do I really want to go vote for these clowns in the midterms? Like, yeah, you do, actually, because it's not just about, it's not just about the gains that you make in a 2-year period between when a president is inaugurated and when you have to face the midterms. I mean, we know that the incumbent usually loses the House during the midterms. I mean, it happened with Bush in 2006, happened with Obama 2010. So we're already, Democrats are already up against, historical circumstances. But it's a long fight. I mean, it's a long fight. It's a generational fight. And more than that, it's a fight that directly affects people that right? There are people in Texas, trans people in Texas, who I know who are leaving Texas, leaving the home that they've known for their entire lives because they no longer feel safe there, right? And perhaps by going out and voting for Democrats in Texas, then you can vote in people who are going to undo all of these anti-trans laws that have been propped up. And you can undo these bananas bounty hunter abortion laws where they have citizens snitching on one another for $10,000. I mean, it's very hard to remain motivated when we're up against what we're up against, but it's so critical for people to do so. By the same token, however, I think it's very critical for people to hold their representatives' feet to the fire. Far too often, I think people, because they have lives and they have things to do, they have kids to feed and jobs to go to, they vote and they think, I voted and that should be enough. These people should be doing what we sent them to do. Right. But you have to stay on them. You have to make sure that they're doing what they were sent to do, right? Like if you think about Obama and Don't Ask, Don't Tell, he was pushed to repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell by voters. Yeah. And so that's the sort of message that I think that people can take, is that you're not as powerless as they want you to think that you are.
Let me point out that the pushing does not just come after we have elected these people. It's got to come before. Mm-hmm. We got to say, why should we elect you? Not because you're good looking, not because you got money, not because you got blah blah blah, but because we want you to take on the Supreme Court, and that's a question to ask people running for Congress.
It's absolutely a question to ask.
But all of them is say, "What are you doing about the Supreme Court?" They'll say, "What do you mean, Supreme Court?" They don't even know.
They don't have an answer to that question, and that's what's so frustrating about it. I mean, Biden put together a commission about the Supreme Court because people have been, legal scholars and legal pundits, people like Elie Mystal in particular, who's the justice correspondent at The Nation and MSNBC, and I have been pounding the drum. Jessica Mason-Pico, my partner in crime at Rewire News Group, have been pounding the drum about the Supreme Court and the Trump takeover of the courts for years. And if you actually sit down and talk to people about what unpacking the courts would entail, I think that you could get a lot of people on board, because it's not, and this is an idea that I completely ganked from Elie Mystal, so I want to give him all credit. But when I first heard it, I was like, this is crazy, because he has this idea about putting 25 more justices on the court.
Yeah.
Right? Let's have a 33 justice Supreme Court, and that way you would actually have diversity of thought. Yeah. You wouldn't have a situation where you have 6 Federalist Society captured judges all thinking and writing the same way, and then 3 liberals who generally are going to all, rule the same way when it comes to certain civil rights. But then when you get outside of civil rights and human rights, when you get into boring stuff like civil procedure or maritime law, then they'll cross the aisle and go vote with conservatives. But it shouldn't be that partisan. It's not supposed to be that partisan. And I think the way to make it unpartisan in a way that would also appeal to Republicans, because let's face it, if you're talking about unpacking the courts, you're going to have to do it in a way that people like Mitch McConnell would be like, yeah, maybe that's not such a bad idea. Not that he ever would say that unpacking the courts is a good idea, but at least if you say, we're not trying to just add more quote unquote Democrats to the court. We're trying to expand the court writ large. That means adding more conservatives, adding more liberals, adding some centrists, add some trans people, we need a first Asian American judge. I mean, it's How have we gone so long in the history of this country and we're just now getting a Black woman judge?
How about somebody?
Justice.
How about somebody who lives on minimum wage being on the
Right.
court? I mean, it would
honestly,
change
or
it.
someone who at least comes from that background, who knows what living like that is like.
I'm reminded actually of there's an old bit from Wanda Sykes where she talks about how different cabinet positions actually should be like jury duty. Like you get a summons and you're like, I'm
Yeah.
Secretary of Treasury, because like if you have a single mom on like the Secretary of Treasury, like she knows how to save some money, right? Like she can look at that and she'd be like, no, we could get that
Bingo.
cheaper at Target.
Yeah, she's gonna clip some coupons.
Yeah, she's gonna clip some coupons, right? Like this is actually it could be a real thing.
And it could happen. That's the thing. If we took this approach to the Supreme Court, not about legalities and qualifications, or you remember the Federalist Society, what is your GPA when you were in law school, that sort of bullshit. And instead, I talked about who are you? Who are you going to be? Who are you going to work for? Why should you be there?
Jackson was so critical because she was a public defender, right? She's a public defender. Right. So what I find fascinating, I would love to be a fly on the wall when the Supreme Court gets a Fourth Amendment case and Jackson has been confirmed, and Jackson, the public defender, and Sonia Sotomayor, the former federal prosecutor, are going to get together and talk about what it's like for example, Black people in this country when it comes to search and seizure, and to have Sonia Sotomayor, who's already a boss when it comes to that thing.
Oh yeah,
comes to Fourth Amendment stuff when it comes to Black Lives Matter. I mean, she wrote what people have called a Black Lives Matter manifesto in a case about 4 or 5 years ago when it came to Fourth Amendment search and seizure. But wouldn't it be interesting to have two liberals who come from different areas of the law to talk about these constitutional issues? Like, I would even be interested to see multiple conservatives who are on a sort of gradation,
who are not bought by the
not all.
Yeah,
exactly. I mean, it's like Sandra Day O'Connor was a Republican, but she wasn't bananas. Like right now, Amy Coney Barrett is bananas. Like, why do I have to listen to what Amy Coney Barrett has to say? It doesn't make any damn sense.
And it's so important what you just said about our new Supreme Court justice coming on, because the establishment media, the New York Times, says, well, she's replacing another liberal, so it's not going to make any difference. But when Thurgood Marshall went on the Supreme Court in the 1960s, appointed by Lyndon Johnson, he was 1 out of 9, so he wasn't going to make a big difference, except he was in the room. And so they had to have a different conversation in their judicial discussions about what this case is about and whom it might affect and what we could do better. And that's the impact. So it doesn't, we don't have to take all 5 new seats. If we put her on the court and put one more like her, or a Republican, like you say, who's not a
further to your point about Thurgood Marshall being in the room, there are studies that show that when you have diversity on the bench, white people's minds are changed, right? So Thurgood Marshall being in that room, it's not just that he was in the room and that he was writing dissents that would later become more mainstream thought. It's that he was in the room with 8 other white dudes who had probably never thought in their lives what it meant to be Black in America.
He changed the argument.
And there was this, and he changed the argument. He changed the tenor of the argument. And so that's what Sotomayor has done with her experience. I mean, I don't know if you recall, during her confirmation process was wildly racist. Because they were talking about, she's going to, because she gave some remarks at a Berkeley speech that, she would have something to bring to bear as a quote wise Latina, right? It was the wise Latina remark that got blown way out of proportion, as if there is no such thing as white male identity, and as if there's no such thing as justices who rule based on that identity. I mean, people have identities. People's lived experience informs the way that they rule on cases. Right. And so having Jackson in the room is going to be a huge deal. Also, having her writing dissents now that in 20 years will become majority opinions is critical. It's so critical. So
she rallies people. And let's go back to Leonard Leo, who said to a group of ultra right-wing funders, we're going to have to understand that judicial confirmations these days are more like political campaigns. And that means all the evil of political campaigns: money, domination, distortion of reality, attacking your opponent, et cetera, et cetera. So you could not think of a worse model for how to choose a Supreme Court justice than that, to turn it into a political campaign. Rather, turn it into a campaign about justice, about rightness,
Wouldn't that
about
be nice?
fairness, which is what we stand for. And the Supreme Court, I think,
Ostensibly.
was created to assure some level of that. At the time, it didn't have much in it,
I mean,
but
I
it had
would
the
push back on
possibility
that
of
a
it.
little bit because, as a Black woman, I would say that the Supreme Court didn't necessarily have my rights and interests at the beginning of the founding of this
None
country,
at the time.
which is a reason why originalism is such nonsense,
Right.
Because if you think about the diversity in this country, if you think about trans rights and lesbian and gay rights and bisexual rights, and if you think about, Black Lives Matter, and you think about immigration, these are all issues that the land-owning white folks in 1770, whatever, did not really have to think about. They weren't thinking about what's it going to be like if a trans person needs to use a bathroom, or what's it going to be like if the police are gunning down Black people at a rate far disproportionate to white people. So the idea that that I, as a Black person, have to base my constitutional jurisprudence on something that white slave owners said 200 years ago is disgusting to me. It's actually really gross to me.
Well,
and I'm going to credit him again, Elie Mystal, his new book. I honestly feel like his book gave me not the right.
I just want to jump in. You want to give me things that I can put up on the screen? Elie Mystal?
Oh yeah, Elie Mystal, ELIEMYSTAL. His book is called Allow Me to Retort. And
Okay,
it's a Black guy's guide to the Constitution. And he, right out of the gate, he says, the Constitution is trash. And I read that and I was like, you know what? He's right. It is trash. It wasn't built for women. It wasn't built for Black and brown people. We can envision a society that is more just than the one slave owners decided to build. And I
would just like to point it out, in the interest of coalition building here, is it was not built for white people who didn't own land.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean,
we have a coalition possibility here.
There's
that
such
is
a
huge.
coalition possibility.
That is the vast
Poor
majority.
white folks, poor Black folks, poor Americans should be banding together. And they're being purposely driven apart by conservatives who are preying on the fears of poor white folks in a lot of respects. And that's what's really sad.
That's happening today. Yeah, it's sad and it's destructive. You mentioned something else, Imani, earlier on, and that was that that Democrats in the Congress are a little mild in considering judicial appointees. They are playing patty cake politics with people who are playing advanced chess, and those Leonard Leo people, and the people who fund them, most importantly, because it's not Leonard Leo. It's the Koch brothers. It's the Mercers. It's the Coors. It's those interests who want to turn our country back to what's called the Lochner era in our country, which ran from about 1900 to 1940, right in that period there. And the Lochner era was what? Imani, tell us about that. It's a concept in judicial history that is completely contradictory to what America is, and they want to take us back to it. What was it?
I would disagree that they want to take us back to it, because generally the Lochner era is universally reviled by legal scholars. So Lochner v. New York was a case in which the Supreme Court struck down, let me get this right, the Supreme Court struck down a law that New York had passed that regulated a labor law that regulated the minimum hours that bakers could work, right? And so the Supreme Court struck down this pro-labor law, basically inventing a quote unquote right to contract. They said that there was a right to contract that was inherent in the Constitution, and that by telling workers that they couldn't work more than a certain number of hours, they were infringing on that worker's right to contract. I mean, that's ridiculous. We all know that's ridiculous, because when it comes to employee-employer power imbalances, there's no way that a baker in New York was working 15 hours a day because they really needed to. It was because they weren't making enough money and because they were working for crappy employers.
And we're there again. And
Right.
that's
here's
my
the
point.
thing
It may
about-
not be advocated by legal scholars, but it is advocated by Leonard Leo. It's advocated by Supreme Court justices who sit there right now. It's advocated that we should go back to that period when people don't have power, but corporations have the power,
Yeah.
and money has the power to rule economically, socially, culturally, across the board, that they are an elite that have a privileged position, and therefore that they should have a privileged control of the society.
And what's interesting about that is that you're right about their desire to go back to that form of Lochner, where workers be damned, corporate interests ruled the day.
Yeah.
But what's interesting about Lochner is that the court created out of whole cloth, people who revile that case say, this right to contract. And so conservatives will make a connection between the Lochner case and the so-called substantive due process rights that also are not written down in the Constitution. The right to abortion, the right to contraception, same-sex marriage. All of these rights are sort of likened to that Lochner era because conservatives view it as the court inventing constitutional rights that aren't there. But again, we go back to what I was saying at the beginning of the show, which is the Ninth Amendment exists. And the reason that liberal legal scholars don't like Lochner is because of the fact that, conservatives will push back on and say, oh, well, there's no right to privacy. You just made that up. And this Griswold v. Connecticut talk of emanations of penumbras, which is something conservatives always like to talk about. They love making fun of Griswold, which is the case that said married couples can use contraception because they talk about privacy emanating from penumbras in the Constitution. Conservatives love to mock that. But the point of Griswold and these substantive due process cases is that we all have rights. We have privacy rights that the government cannot intrude on, right? The government cannot go into your bedroom and look at who you're having intimate relations with and say, no, you're going to go to jail because you're having intimate relations with someone who we don't approve of. But that's the era that conservatives want to take us to. So they don't like Lochner, but they like Lochner. And it's really interesting. There's a lot of legal scholarship right now about how Lochner is changing. Who wants to talk about Lochner? I mean, this is like the worst conversation from first-year con law in law school. But it really is interesting in the ways
I don't
in
want
which
to talk about the
conservatives
legality of it, but I want to talk about the
reality
reality
of hypocrisy. Right. The reality of it is
the fact that
hypocrisy.
they want to take us
Yes.
back to a period when a tiny elite
Yes.
run the country. They've already
Absolutely.
taken us quite a ways back to that. And
Absolutely.
that's my basic message, is that this is not about law. This is not about judiciary.
It's
This
about
is
people and
about people
power.
and about power, particularly. Who has power and what are they doing with it? And how are they using their power to get more at our expense?
Right.
And that's what's happening with the takeover of the Supreme Court, and why we have to take that issue into politics, into Democratic Party politics to start with, because our Democratic officials don't understand it. They don't know
That's
that
absolutely
this is
right.
going on.
And quite frankly, just, I know your listeners love like action, like what can we
Yes.
do?
Yeah.
It's not, the Judicial Crisis Network was which Senator White, I almost said Senator Whiteboard. I really do call him Senator Whiteboard, but Senator Whitehouse. I love the whiteboards, but Senator Whitehouse was talking about the Judicial Crisis Network. They're not just active on the federal level; they're also active on the state level.
Right.
And there are some states. Texas is a state where your judges are elected. Your state judges are elected.
Yeah.
And when it comes to issues like trans rights and abortion rights, with the federal government is crapping the bed on, those lawsuits are going to be filed in state court. So it matters who's sitting on the state court bench. And so that's something that your listeners can do. If they're in Texas, I'm telling you, you elect your judges. For the rest of you, wherever you live, just Google it right now. Find out if your state elects judges or if the governor appoints them.
Right.
Because if your state judges are elected, you can get involved at the local level. That's really important at a time when the federal courts are captured.
Exactly. And not just those rights, but labor rights, consumer rights, every
kinds of
right that you have
That's
is in the
absolutely right.
hands of these people. Nobody even knows their names. and they're making these decisions. So we've got to know their
Absolutely
name,
right.
and we've got to take them into politics. And that's the way you take power back, not just voting, but putting an agenda forward and voting on that agenda, not a
And getting
personality.
involved locally. Like so much of
Totally.
politics is local.
Yes.
Particularly with the courts. State courts are going to become so important when it comes to, the rights of marginalized people. And
That's absolutely
the
right.
best thing, if you live in a state
Rights
that
of all
elects
people,
judges, the best thing you
really.
can do is inform other voters, right? Because I
Yeah.
mean, election of judges, that's the thing you look at when you're in the voting booth, and at the end you're like, oh crap, I didn't do any of this research. So you're just sort of ticking off names. Make sure you do that research in advance.
Yeah.
Even if it's just only vote for public defenders. You know what I mean?
Well,
Even
and get
that
with
would
people,
change the balance.
and get with people before that election and go over who these people are that are
Yeah.
here are the elections that are actually going to matter in your life. Whether you're going to get a fair wage or not, whether you're going to get an equal wage if you're a woman, whether et cetera, on down the line, whether or as a consumer you have any power against Google and Amazon and et cetera, whether you have any power at all. These are, as Imani is pointing out, individuals right in your own community who are going to be making these decisions. And if we build a politics around that in advance of the election, not waiting on the election to happen and then hoping they'll listen to us, they won't. They're going to listen to money at that point, but doing it in advance. So that's the importance of what Imani Gandy and her organization is doing, and people like her and people like you. That's the answer. There's nothing complicated about it. There's nothing easy about it. And as Imani points out, it's a long struggle. I think of the suffrage movement again and again. That those three ladies who launched that movement in Seneca, New York, in 1842. They never lived to vote. They never cast a vote, but they launched a movement, and that's what we're trying to do here. Is to launch a movement that includes the judiciary of the United States. Imani, thank you so much for what you are doing. We really appreciate you. Want to have you back. So
I'd love to.
Stay in touch with us about what you've got going and what we ought to be doing as well. And all of you, thanks for tuning in with us here. We'll be back with you again with another Hightower Lowdown Chat and Chew happy hour. It's not always happy, but it's good.